My name is Rebecca Mitchell, 32, and I've always been the family's designated charity case. That sunny Sunday at my parents' Hamptons estate, I wore my usual Target dress while my siblings flaunted designer labels. When Uncle Richard announced he was selling his downtown building, my brother James smirked and whispered, "Not like you could afford it anyway, Becky." If only they knew about the portfolio hidden behind my modest Honda and tiny apartment. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe if family drama hits close to home. I promise this story about standing your ground might just inspire your own victory moment. The Mitchells weren't just wealthy. They were old money, with roots in Manhattan real estate stretching back 4 generations and branches extending into investment banking that my grandfather had pioneered in the 1960s. My father, William Mitchell, had expanded the family empire with calculated ruthlessness that served him well in business but poorly at home. My mother, Eleanor, came from similar stock, the daughter of a shipping magnate who measured worth by association and appearances. Together, they created a household where success was narrowly defined, and competition among siblings was encouraged rather than discouraged. James, my oldest brother at 38, had followed directly in our father's footsteps, becoming a senior investment banker at Morgan Stanley, with a corner office and the inflated ego to match. Victoria, 36, had chosen medicine, becoming a plastic surgeon to the elite of the Upper East Side, turning beauty into a commodity she could control. Michael, the youngest before me at 34, had ventured into tech, launching a successful startup that he sold for millions before his 30th birthday, proving himself the innovative one while still playing within the family's accepted boundaries. And then there was me, Rebecca, who after graduating summa cum laude from Wharton had shocked everyone by declining positions at top firms to work for a small urban planning company. Such a waste of potential, my mother would lament, at charity galas, while my father simply introduced me last at family gatherings with a noticeable downtick in his voice. The annual family business meeting was a tradition my grandfather had started decades ago, ostensibly to keep everyone informed about the family's holdings and investments, but which had evolved into a thinly veiled competition for parental approval. I arrived at the Hampton estate that Sunday in my reliable Honda Civic, immediately feeling the weight of disapproval as I pulled in beside James's Maserati and Victoria's Tesla. "Still driving that thing?" was my father's greeting as I stepped onto the immaculate gravel driveway, my Target sundress already drawing my mother's critical eye. "We could help you with a down payment on something more appropriate," she offered, managing to make generosity sound like criticism. I smiled and hugged them both, immune after years of such comments. "I like my car. It gets me where I need to go," I replied, carrying my overnight bag inside myself despite the hovering staff offering to assist. What my family had never understood was that my choices weren't born of necessity, but intentionality. After watching the emptiness behind my siblings' materialism through college, I had made a private vow to build something meaningful on my own terms. My modest outward appearance was not a reflection of struggle, but strategy, something I kept close to my chest as I navigated the familiar hallways of my childhood home, nodding warmly to Maria, our longtime housekeeper who had been more of a mother to me than Eleanor ever was. The family's assumption of my financial struggles had begun as an annoyance, but had evolved into an unexpected advantage that I cultivated with careful precision. That weekend, as I settled into my old bedroom still decorated with my teenage memorabilia, unlike my siblings' rooms, which had been updated to luxurious guest suites, I felt a quiet confidence beneath my practiced humility. The carefully maintained illusion of my modest life was about to serve me in ways my status-obsessed family could never imagine. The Mitchell estate sprawled across 3 acres of prime Hampton's coastline, a colonial revival masterpiece with 12 bedrooms, an indoor and outdoor pool, tennis courts, and gardens meticulously maintained by a staff of 5 full-time groundskeepers. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, Persian rugs worth small fortunes covered Brazilian hardwood floors, and artwork that belonged in museums adorned walls papered in silks and brocades. While my siblings immediately dispersed to their usual territories, I found myself gravitating toward the kitchen where the staff was preparing for the evening's formal dinner. "Miss Rebecca!" exclaimed Carmen, the family's chef of 20 years, her face lighting up as I entered. "It's been too long since you've come to visit." Unlike my family members who barely acknowledged the staff's existence beyond their function, I had always found comfort in the warmth of the people who actually made the Mitchell estate run. I spent an hour helping Carmen prepare appetizers, catching up on her granddaughter's college acceptance and her son's new business, information my parents wouldn't know despite employing her for 2 decades. The dinner that evening was an exercise in barely concealed warfare disguised as civil conversation. Cousins, aunts, and uncles had joined the immediate family, creating an impressive tableau of wealth and privilege. Rebecca, my Aunt Patricia, called from across the mahogany expanse that seated 24 comfortably. "I heard you're still with that little urban planning firm. How quaint to stick with something so long." Her words dripped with the implication that my career choice reflected a lack of options rather than dedication. Before I could respond, Victoria jumped in with practiced conversational aikido. "Not everyone needs to pursue advancement, Aunt Patricia. Some people prefer stability." The slight pause before her final word transformed it from a virtue to a character flaw. I smiled and took a sip of the exquisite Cabernet while memories of my college revelation flooded back. It had been during my junior year at Wharton when most of my classmates were competing for prestigious internships at Goldman Sachs and McKinsey that I had taken an elective in urban economics with Professor Frank Williams, a former developer, who had made millions transforming neglected neighborhoods before turning to academia. "Real estate isn't just about property," he had told me during office hours after I'd submitted a paper that caught his attention. "It's about vision, about seeing potential where others see problems." Under his mentorship, I had begun to see my family's real estate empire differently, not as a birthright to inherit, but as a template to improve upon. Where my ancestors had built for profit alone, I saw possibilities for transformation that served communities while still generating returns. After graduation, using my trust fund money that had been intended for a down payment on a New York apartment, I secretly purchased my first small property, a dilapidated duplex in Newark that experts like my family would have dismissed as worthless. With Professor Williams' guidance from afar and hands-on work alongside contractors I hired, I renovated the space myself, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up instead of from an executive suite. The duplex sold for a 40% profit 6 months later, and more importantly, provided housing that the working families who purchased the units could actually afford. The present conversation pulled me back as James regaled the table with tales of his latest yacht purchase. 0 to 60 knots in under 10 seconds, he boasted to Uncle Richard, whose attention he particularly coveted. "You'll have to come see it when we dock in Saint-Tropez next month." My other siblings weren't to be outdone. Victoria detailed her newest medical spa location on Park Avenue, while Michael described his recent angel investment in a tech company developing artificial intelligence for financial markets. I observed it all with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years cataloging her family's weaknesses. James's desperate need for validation, Victoria's insecurity beneath her perfect exterior, Michael's ambition tempered by risk aversion, my father's cold calculation, and my mother's status anxiety. The dynamics shifted when Uncle Richard, my father's younger brother and the family maverick who had built his own separate real estate development company, cleared his throat significantly. "Since we're all gathered," he announced, commanding immediate attention. "I wanted to let family know first before it hits the market next week. I'm selling the Harrington building downtown." The table erupted in interested murmurs as everyone recognized the property, a prime 20-story commercial building in the financial district that had been in Uncle Richard's portfolio for decades. As coffee and dessert were served, speculation about the property's value and potential buyers dominated conversation. with James and my father already discussing possible investment syndication among family members. I listened carefully, asking a single question that turned several heads in surprise. What's the current occupancy rate, and what are the terms of the existing commercial leases? Uncle Richard looked momentarily startled at my informed inquiry, but James cut in before he could answer, raising his whiskey glass with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Always the analyst, Becky. Not like you could do anything with the information anyway. His comment drew knowing chuckles around the table, setting the stage perfectly for the meeting scheduled for the following morning, where my family's perception of me would begin its seismic shift. Grandfather's study had remained unchanged since his death 15 years ago. A temple to old-world power with walls of leather-bound books, mounted hunting trophies, and a massive mahogany desk behind which my father now sat like a monarch holding court. The morning sunlight filtered through leaded glass windows, casting patterns across the oriental carpet, where 3 generations of Mitchells gathered in a horseshoe of leather chairs and antique sofas. Uncle Richard stood beside a projected presentation, walking us through the details of the Harrington building with the precision of someone who had spent decades in commercial real estate. The property encompasses an entire city block, with current zoning allowing for mixed-use development. The existing structure dates to 1928, with renovations in 1962 and 1994, and features Art Deco detailing throughout. Current market valuation places it at approximately $75 million, though I believe we can command $85 given the location and historical significance. As he clicked through slides showing floor plans, tenant information, and revenue projections, I noticed my siblings leaning forward with interest, already mentally calculating their potential participation. When Uncle Richard opened the floor for questions, I raised my hand simultaneously with James. My father, predictably, nodded toward his firstborn. What's the debt service currently on the property? And would you consider a partial family acquisition? With an institutional partner, James asked, his question designed to showcase his financial acumen. Several more technical questions followed from Victoria and Michael, each carefully constructed to demonstrate their business intelligence and financial capacity. When the initial volley subsided, I raised my hand again, and Uncle Richard, perhaps, from novelty, acknowledged me. I'm curious about the building's conversion potential, I began, watching confusion flash across several faces. Specifically, the upper floors that have been vacant for 3 years now. Given the neighborhood's changing demographics and the city's recent rezoning initiatives, has anyone explored residential conversion for floors 15 through 20? The room fell suddenly silent before James let out a sharp laugh that others quickly joined. Residential conversion in a Class A commercial building? That's why you stick to the theory and leave the actual deals to the grown-ups, Becky. His comment opened the floodgates. Not everyone has a head for real business, Victoria added with feigned sympathy. Cousin Stephen chimed in. You're just the poor one in the family, Rebecca. Nothing wrong with that. Someone has to keep the rest of us grounded. What followed was a cascade of thinly veiled insults wrapped in faux concern and condescension. Perhaps Rebecca could handle the PR for whatever we decide, suggested Aunt Patricia, as if offering a consolation prize. She's always been good with creative thinking. Each comment landed like a calculated blow, reminding me of my first renovation project 7 years ago. I had lived in that Newark duplex during renovations, sleeping on a mattress on the floor while learning electrical wiring from Mr. Guzman, a master electrician nearing retirement who had been skeptical of the rich girl playing contractor until I stayed alongside him for 14-hour days, absorbing everything he could teach. From Mrs. Chen, I learned the intricacies of permitting and code compliance as we navigated city bureaucracy together. From Javon Williams, a third-generation carpenter, I learned to recognize quality materials and craftsmanship, spending weekends scouring salvage yards for original fixtures that matched the building's character. That project had taught me more than any Wharton class, showing me how to build a network based on respect and mutual benefit rather than family connections. It had also been the beginning of my system for identifying undervalued properties, a methodology I had refined through dozens of subsequent projects, combining demographic research, zoning analysis, architectural assessment, and community engagement in ways my family would consider beneath them. In the 7 years since, I had developed relationships with contractors, suppliers, city officials, and community organizations throughout the metropolitan area, creating channels of information that alerted me to opportunities long before they reached the market. My family, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware, seeing only my modest apartment and clothing, interpreting my independence as limitation rather than choice. My mother's voice cut through my thoughts and the continuing chorus of dismissive comments. Rebecca has always focused on alternative approaches, she offered in what she clearly thought was a defense. Not everyone measures success the same way. I'm sure your small projects are very fulfilling, dear. Her attempt at support cut deeper than the outright mockery, revealing her fundamental misunderstanding of who I was and what I had built. I maintained my composed expression, a skill honed through years of family gatherings while cataloging each dismissive comment and condescending glance, fuel for the revelation to come. "Excuse me for a moment," I said calmly, rising from my seat as the conversation shifted to speculation about which family members might participate in the Harrington Building acquisition. No one particularly noticed my exit, which suited me perfectly as I made my way to the guest room where I'd stored my portfolio briefcase. 7 years of disciplined work and strategic planning had built an empire that existed entirely beneath my family's awareness. Starting with that first duplex, I had reinvested every dollar of profit, gradually scaling from single-family homes to multi-unit buildings, then to small commercial properties, and finally to the mixed-use developments that had become my specialty. Where traditional developers saw rigid boundaries between residential, commercial, and community spaces, I created integrations that maximized both financial returns and livability. My second-year acquisition of a failing strip mall had been transformed into a community hub with affordable apartments above locally owned businesses, generating both strong returns and neighborhood revitalization. By year 4, I had developed relationships with select investors who valued my approach, allowing me to scale without sacrificing my vision or independence. I specialized in identifying buildings with good bones, but outdated uses, particularly older office buildings that could be reimagined as residential spaces while preserving architectural character. Each project built my reputation among a network that operated entirely separate from my family's circles, allowing me to move through deals with anonymity that more established developers couldn't achieve. My partnership with Esther Kwan, a brilliant architect who shared my philosophy, had further refined my approach, creating a signature style that transformed formerly commercial spaces into sought-after residential communities. Last year's conversion of the Thompson Building, a neglected 1940s office complex, into mixed-income apartments with cooperative workspaces had won Urban Design Awards and generated a 38% return on investment. I gathered the necessary documents and returned to the study, where the conversation had evolved into technical discussions of financing structures for family participation in Uncle Richard's building. "I'd like to express serious interest in acquiring the Harrington Building," I stated clearly as I re-entered the room, causing several heads to turn with expressions ranging from amusement to confusion. Uncle Richard, ever the businessman, responded first, despite the smirks from my siblings. "That's a substantial property, Rebecca. We're talking about an $85 million acquisition." His tone was patient, as if explaining basic math to a child. "I'm aware of the asking price," I replied, my voice level as I placed my leather portfolio on the table. Victoria let out a theatrical sigh. "Becky, there's nothing wrong with staying in your lane. We all have different strengths." Her condescension was practiced, perfected over decades of establishing hierarchy between us. "You should focus on what you know best. Leave these major investments to those of us with the experience and capital." My father remained conspicuously silent, neither defending me nor joining the dismissal, his expression unreadable behind steepled fingers. I turned directly to Uncle Richard, ignoring the others. "I'd like to discuss this seriously. I've already toured the property twice and have preliminary plans drawn up for a partial residential conversion of the upper floors, maintaining commercial space below with community amenities on the third floor and rooftop." The room fell silent, as Uncle Richard's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "You've toured the building? I didn't authorize any showings yet." "Marcus Thompson showed me through last month," I replied, referencing his business partner. "And again last week with my architect and general contractor." The atmosphere shifted perceptibly as Uncle Richard pulled out his phone, presumably to verify my claim. After a brief text exchange, he looked up with new interest. "Marcus says you had quite a detailed inspection. He didn't mention it because you asked for confidentiality." This revelation created an almost comical series of expressions around the room as family members recalibrated their understanding of the situation. James recovered first, his dismissiveness morphing to suspicion. "What game are you playing, Rebecca? You can't possibly have the resources for a property of this magnitude." The tension in grandfather's study crystallized as 8 pairs of eyes fixed on me with emotions ranging from amusement to confusion to outright hostility. "This isn't a game," I responded to James, meeting his gaze steadily. "The Harrington building represents exactly the type of property I've specialized in for the past 7 years. The core structure is sound, the Art Deco features are exceptional, and the location is prime for the kind of mixed-use reimagining that has become my company's signature focus." Uncle Richard's business partner Marcus chose that moment to join the meeting, entering with an apologetic nod to the family gathering. "Sorry to interrupt, but I saw your text, Richard. Yes, I've shown Rebecca through the building twice now. Her team was quite thorough." He turned to me with professional respect, entirely absent from my family's expressions. "Did you bring the preliminary renderings your architect drafted?" They had some innovative approaches to the atrium conversion. The family's confusion deepened, visibly as I withdrew a tablet from my portfolio and brought up Esther's conceptual designs, handing it to Uncle Richard. "We envision maintaining commercial occupancy through floor 14, while converting 15 through 20 to residential units that preserve the architectural integrity and capitalize on the upper floor views. The building's existing Art Deco features would become signature elements of the residential spaces, with the original mail chutes, elevator doors, and corridor detailing restored rather than replaced." As Uncle Richard and Marcus scrolled through the designs with growing interest, I explained our vision methodically, detailing how each aspect addressed current market demands while respecting the building's historical significance. The concept had been months in development, beginning when Marcus had first mentioned Richard's potential interest in selling during a chance meeting at an urban planning conference where I'd been a featured speaker. My mind flashed back to the Walker Hotel project, my most challenging conversion to date, where structural issues discovered mid-renovation had threatened to derail the entire project and drain my capital reserves. Instead of cutting corners, I had innovated, bringing in structural engineers to design a reinforcement system that eventually became a design feature of the finished building. That project had tested every skill and relationship I'd built, requiring 16-hour days and personally guaranteed bridge financing that had kept me awake nights until the completed building sold to an investment group for double our projected revenue. The lessons from that near disaster had refined my due diligence process, which was evident in the thorough analysis I now presented for the Harrington building. "This is all very creative," my father finally spoke, his tone careful. "But the financial reality remains. A property of this scale requires substantial capital and established banking relationships." His statement held the familiar note of dismissal, but now tinged with genuine confusion about my intentions. Victoria leaned forward with exaggerated concern. "Becky, have you gotten in over your head? No one expects you to compete at this level." James was less diplomatic. Where exactly do you think you'll get $85 million? This isn't a game of Monopoly. I met each question with measured calm, having anticipated this exact reaction. Mitchell Urban Transformations currently holds a portfolio of 17 properties across the tri-state area, with a combined valuation of $163 million and manageable leverage ratios. I opened my portfolio again and distributed one-page summaries of my company holdings to key family members. Our last 5 projects have all exceeded projected ROI by an average of 28%, and we maintain strong relationships with 3 regional banks and 2 national lenders specializing in urban renewal projects. The papers passed. Around the room contained professionally prepared asset listings, complete with property photos, acquisition dates, renovation costs, and current valuations. James scanned his copy with narrowed eyes. This has to be fabricated. There's no way. You've built this without family knowledge. Victoria studied her sheet more carefully. These properties must be heavily mortgaged. You've taken on dangerous levels of debt. My mother simply stared at her copy in silent disbelief. Michael, always the most analytical, was comparing properties against his phone's browser. This mixed-use development on Fremont Street, wasn't this the old Westridge manufacturing building? I read about this conversion in Business Insider last year. Before anyone could respond, I placed the final piece of evidence on the table, my financing pre-approval from National First Bank, one of the country's largest commercial lenders, for $75 million specifically for the Harrington building acquisition, with the remaining equity to come from my company's cash reserves and a small group of select investors who had partnered with me on previous successful projects. The pre-approval letter created a moment of stunned silence before Uncle Richard broke it with a low whistle. "This is legitimate," he confirmed to the room after examining the document. "National First doesn't issue these without extensive due diligence." I reached into my portfolio once more and extracted the document that would transform my family's perception permanently. A complete purchase and sale agreement for the Harrington building, already bearing Marcus's initial approval as Richard's partner, contingent only on Richard's final signature. "As you'll see," I explained as Richard began reviewing the contract, "we're prepared to offer $86 million, $1 million above asking, with a 60-day close and no contingencies beyond. Standard title verification." The terms outlined in the contract demonstrated not just financial capacity, but strategic understanding of Uncle Richard's priorities. A clean sale without complicated contingencies, favorable terms on the portion of the seller financing we'd requested, and provisions allowing him to maintain office space in the building for 3 years as his company transitioned to new headquarters. "You negotiated a 2% seller note?" Richard asked, eyebrows raised as he studied the financing structure. "At favorable terms for both parties," I confirmed. "Your carry gives you ongoing interest income at 2 points above market rate, while providing us flexibility in our capital stack. The 3-year conversion timeline for the upper floors also ensures minimal disruption to existing commercial tenants on the lower levels, maintaining your relationships with long-term clients during ownership transition." The technical discussion between Uncle Richard, Marcus, and myself continued for several minutes, shifting the room's dynamic dramatically as family members realized they were witnessing an advanced negotiation between equals rather than the expected dismissal of an implausible proposal. James recovered enough to launch his counterattack. "This is financially reckless," he declared, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "You've clearly leveraged yourself to dangerous levels. What happens when the market turns?" Victoria, following his lead, added, "Who's really backing this?" "No offense, Becky, but someone must be pulling strings behind the scenes. Is there a boyfriend or partner we don't know about?" The implication was clear. A woman, particularly her little sister, couldn't possibly have built something of this magnitude independently. Michael studied me with new eyes, his expression calculating rather than dismissive. The Mitchell name opens doors, he suggested. You've been trading on family connections while keeping us in the dark. I had anticipated every accusation and methodically addressed each one, opening my laptop to display a comprehensive financial presentation. Our company maintains conservative leverage across the portfolio, with an average loan-to-value ratio of 58%, I explained, displaying charts that detailed my careful financial management. Each property generates positive cash flow with debt service coverage ratios exceeding 1.5, and we maintain cash reserves sufficient to cover 6 months of operations across the portfolio. Turning to Victoria's insinuation, I continued. Mitchell Urban Transformations is solely owned and operated by me, with project-specific investors participating in individual deals through clearly defined limited partnerships that preserve my controlling interest and decision authority. I clicked to a slide showing my company's organizational structure. I deliberately avoided using the Mitchell name professionally until the company was established enough to stand on its own merits. Each point was accompanied by documentation that turned accusation into reluctant acknowledgement. James's hostile questioning about my business model gave me the opening to explain my specialized approach to urban redevelopment. We identify undervalued properties with strong bones but outdated usage, particularly in transitional neighborhoods where zoning changes or infrastructure improvements have created unrealized potential. The explanation took us through my 7-year journey from that first duplex to my current portfolio, highlighting key decision points that had shaped my company's growth. I shared the philosophy that differentiated my approach from traditional development. By preserving architectural integrity while adapting spaces to contemporary needs, we create properties that command premium pricing while contributing to neighborhood revitalization rather than gentrification. The complete picture revealed not just financial success, but a coherent vision that contrasted sharply with my family's traditional profit-first approach, allowing me to succeed in areas they had overlooked. The shifting expressions around the room told their own story. Shock giving way to disbelief, then reluctant recognition, and in some cases, the first glimmerings of respect, all underscored by the uncomfortable realization that they had fundamentally misjudged me for years. The meeting concluded with Uncle Richard requesting time to review my offer in detail, though his expression suggested the deal was all but certain. As family members dispersed from the study, the atmosphere had transformed from the familiar hierarchy of previous gatherings to an awkward uncertainty. No one quite knew how to interact with me now that the foundation of our relationship, my perceived financial inferiority, had been so thoroughly dismantled. I gathered my materials calmly, expecting the individual approaches that would inevitably follow. My father was first, lingering until others had left before approaching me with an expression I'd rarely seen directed my way. Uncertainty. That was unexpected, he began, struggling to reconcile the daughter he thought he knew with the businesswoman he'd just witnessed. You've built something substantial. His words carried competing emotions, pride, fighting against embarrassment. At his previous dismissal, respect mingled with confusion about how he had misread me so thoroughly. Why didn't you tell us? The question contained multitudes: hurt, genuine curiosity, and perhaps a touch of accusation. Would you have listened? I asked simply. Or would you have insisted I follow the Mitchell way instead of finding my own path? Before he could answer, my mother appeared at his side, her social instincts already recalibrating to accommodate this new reality. I always knew you had entrepreneurial spirit, she declared with breathtaking revisionism. You were always so independent, even as a child. Her attempt to retroactively claim support was exactly as I had expected, her self-image unable to accommodate the reality that she had consistently underestimated her own daughter. I smiled politely without validating her reinvention of our history. James intercepted me in the hallway as I headed toward the garden, his expression darkened by what I recognized as his trademark combination of anger and insecurity. You deliberately misled the family, he accused, unable to frame my success as anything but a personal betrayal. All these years pretending to be the struggling younger sister while secretly competing with us. His perspective was telling. In his world, my independent success could only be interpreted as an act of family disloyalty rather than personal achievement. I never pretended anything, I corrected him calmly. I chose a different path and different priorities. You all made assumptions I didn't feel obligated to correct. Victoria found me on the terrace an hour later, her approach more measured than James's confrontation. Your developments are actually quite impressive, she offered, the compliment, carrying the implicit surprise that still somewhat undermined it. That adaptive reuse project in Jersey City won an architectural award, didn't it? Her attempt at professional recognition was genuine but awkward, like speaking a language she was only beginning to learn. I should have paid more attention when you mentioned your work. Her words contained the closest thing to an apology I would likely receive, her pride making direct acknowledgement of her condescension impossible. We could potentially collaborate, she added, already calculating how to incorporate my unexpected success into her world. I have patients who might be interested in premium properties like yours. I thanked her politely while maintaining the boundaries I'd spent years establishing. Michael, always the most pragmatic sibling, approached me with straightforward curiosity rather than emotional complication. How did you identify your first properties? He asked, as we walked along the perimeter of our parents' estate. What metrics do you use to evaluate potential acquisitions? His questions were those of someone genuinely interested in methodology, rather than ego protection, allowing us the most authentic conversation I'd had with a family member in years. I explained my evaluation process in terms his analytical mind would appreciate, finding unexpected satisfaction in professional exchange with my brother for perhaps the first time in our adult lives. I'd like to see one of your completed projects. Sometime, he said as our walk concluded, an olive branch I was inclined to accept. Navigating these new dynamics required careful balance, accepting the beginning acknowledgement of my accomplishments without seeking the validation I no longer needed, maintaining professional boundaries while allowing for potentially healthier family relationships to develop. I was neither vindictive enough to reject these initial overtures nor naive enough to expect immediate transformation in patterns established over decades. The most telling moment came at dinner that evening, when seating arrangements subtly shifted to place me near Uncle Richard, rather than at my usual position at the far end of the table. Conversation now included occasional questions about my professional opinion on real estate matters, though these were still tentative, as if my family was testing whether my expertise was limited to a lucky few projects or represented genuine knowledge. I maintained my usual calm demeanor, neither gloating over my revealed success nor minimizing my accomplishments to make others comfortable. This new reality would take time for everyone to adjust to, especially for a family so accustomed to its established hierarchy and so resistant to change. The second night of the family weekend found me walking along the moonlit beach behind my parents' estate, seeking momentary solitude to process the dramatic shift in family dynamics. The sound of approaching footsteps on the sand announced James's arrival before his voice did. You made me look like a fool today, he began without preamble, his tone edged with the rawness of wounded pride rather than his usual calculated arrogance. The vulnerability in his accusation surprised me. I turned to face my oldest brother, seeing beyond his defensive anger to something rarely visible, genuine insecurity. That wasn't my intention, I replied truthfully. Today was about the Harrington building, not about you. He scoffed, kicking at the sand. Easy for you to say when you're suddenly the family success story. Something in his bitter tone prompted me to really look at him, and what I saw made me pause. Behind the expensive watch and tailored casual wear, James appeared exhausted, with tension lines I hadn't noticed earlier. What's really bothering you? I asked directly. setting aside decades of competitive conditioning. His resistance crumbled, with unexpected speed. "The fund I'm managing is underperforming," he admitted after a lengthy silence, staring out at the dark Atlantic. "3/4 below benchmarks and significant investor withdrawal. If I can't turn it around by year-end—" He left the consequences unspoken, but I understood the professional and personal catastrophe it represented for him. "Does Dad know?" "Are you kidding? I'd rather cut off my arm than tell him I'm failing." The admission created a strange new connection between us, a shared understanding of the immense pressure of William Mitchell's expectations. Our conversation shifted to something we'd never shared before: honesty about the emotional toll of our family's demands. James revealed the constant fear beneath his arrogance, the crushing weight of being the designated successor to our father's legacy. I shared the frustration of years of dismissal, the determination that had fueled my independent path. We weren't suddenly loving siblings, but we were perhaps becoming real people to each other for the first time. A similar revelation came the following morning when Victoria sought me out for coffee on the terrace, ostensibly to discuss potential business collaboration. 20 minutes into our conversation, her carefully maintained facade cracked. "My marriage is falling apart," she confessed, setting down her porcelain cup with trembling hands. "David is talking about divorce." The perfect life she had projected, so confidently, with her successful surgeon husband and 2 photogenic children, was apparently crumbling behind the scenes. "I've been working 80-hour weeks trying to expand the practice while maintaining our lifestyle. David says he doesn't know me anymore, and truthfully, some days neither do I." Her vulnerability created space for authentic connection that decades of competitive positioning had prevented. "How do you balance it?" she asked with genuine curiosity. "Business success and personal fulfillment? You seem centered in a way I'm not." The question led to our first real conversation as adults, discussing the metrics of success beyond money and status that our family had never taught us to value. The most profound conversation occurred that afternoon when my parents requested a private meeting in my father's home office. I entered warily, prepared for some new form of subtle undermining despite the weekend's revelations. Instead, I found them uncharacteristically subdued. "We've been reflecting on the family dynamics we've fostered," my father began formally, clearly uncomfortable with emotional territory. "Your mother and I recognize that we may have created an environment that encouraged unhealthy competition rather than mutual support." The carefully worded acknowledgement was as close to an apology as William Mitchell had likely ever offered anyone. My mother, less constrained by pride, was more direct. "We underestimated you, Rebecca. For years, we misinterpreted your choices as limitations rather than deliberate decisions." She paused, seemingly struggling with a difficult realization. "I think perhaps we've been measuring success by very limited standards." This opening allowed me to finally express what I had kept hidden for years. "Do you know how deeply it hurt to be constantly dismissed?" I asked, my voice steady despite the emotion behind it. Every family gathering, every holiday, every phone call included some reminder that I wasn't meeting expectations, that my choices made me somehow less valuable as a Mitchell. I described specific moments that had cut deeply. My father's dismissive introduction of me at his company gala, my mother's backhanded compliments about my modest lifestyle, the collective family assumption that my career choices reflected inability rather than intention. I kept my success private because I needed to build something that was truly mine, measured by my own standards rather than the family yardstick. My parents listened with unusual attention, perhaps truly seeing me for the first time. "The Mitchell way isn't the only way to create something of value," I concluded. "The buildings I've developed improve lives while generating returns. That balance matters to me." The conversation marked the beginning of a recalibration in our family values, not an instant transformation, but the first acknowledgement that our traditional metrics of success might be unnecessarily narrow. The next evening's dinner had a noticeably different tone. Uncle Richard raised his glass in a toast that would have been unimaginable days earlier. To Rebecca, whose vision for the Harrington Building will write the next chapter in its history. He followed this with an unexpected offer. I'd be interested in discussing a potential partnership on future projects where our expertise might complement each other. The offer represented professional recognition I had never sought from my family but found I valued nonetheless. I considered it carefully, weighing the potential benefits against the complications of mixing business with family. I'd be open to discussing specific projects where our approaches align, I responded, maintaining the boundaries that had protected my independence. Perhaps starting with something limited in scope to test the collaboration. The careful response established my position as an equal partner rather than a junior family member grateful for inclusion, a distinction that didn't escape notice around the table. The weekend concluded with new understanding in some relationships, lingering tension in others, and a collective family recognition that the established order had permanently shifted. I maintained my firm boundaries while allowing for the possibility of healthier connections based on mutual respect rather than hierarchy. The drive back to my modest apartment in my reliable Honda carried a different energy than my arrival had. The weight of pretense lifted while new possibilities and responsibilities took shape in my mind. 3 months later, I stood inside the Harrington Building's magnificent Art Deco lobby, watching as construction crews carefully preserved the original brass mailboxes while updating infrastructure hidden behind restored marble walls. The purchase had closed 5 weeks after the family weekend, with Uncle Richard accepting my offer after only minor negotiations on the transition timeline. The project represented my largest undertaking to date, but the meticulous planning and financial structuring ensured it remained within my carefully established risk parameters. What had changed was my approach to family involvement, a subtle but significant evolution in my business philosophy. After thoughtful consideration, I had invited Uncle Richard to participate as a consulting advisor on the commercial portion of the building, leveraging his decades of experience with office tenants while maintaining my decision authority on the overall project. His expertise proved valuable, and our working relationship developed a mutual respect entirely different from our previous family dynamic. My father, after several careful conversations that established clear professional boundaries, provided introduction to international investors interested in U.S. real estate, expanding my capital network while respecting my methodological independence. Most surprisingly, Michael and I developed a genuine collaboration when his tech expertise helped create property management systems that streamlined operations across my growing portfolio. These selective family business interactions remained carefully separated from personal relationships, which evolved at their own slower pace. I maintained my modest apartment and practical car, despite my now public financial success. These choices, representing values I genuinely held rather than a facade. The supposed simplicity of my lifestyle had never been about limitation, but about intentional focus, allocating resources toward impact rather than impression. The family's adjustment to this reality came gradually, with occasional relapses into old patterns that required gentle but firm correction. James struggled most with the new dynamic, his own financial challenges making my success a complicated mirror. Our moonlit beach conversation had created an opening, but genuine relationship would require consistent effort from both sides over time. Victoria, surprising everyone including herself, began scaling back her practice hours following our heart-to-heart, prioritizing her marriage and children with a new understanding that status and income were poor substitutes for presence and connection. Her marriage entered counseling rather than divorce court, the outcome still uncertain but the effort genuine. My parents' evolution came in small moments rather than dramatic declarations. My father asking about my project's community impact rather than just its profit margin. My mother noting approvingly when a design magazine featured one of my developments. without mentioning its investment return. The shifts were subtle but meaningful, suggesting the possibility of values expanding beyond the narrow financial metrics that had dominated family evaluation for generations. 9 months after the Hampton weekend, we gathered for the soft opening of the Harrington building's first completed residential floor. Family members walked through spaces where former executive offices had been transformed into light-filled apartments that honored the building's architectural heritage while meeting contemporary needs. The rooftop garden, once private space for the highest-ranking executives, now offered community areas for all building residents, with spectacular views previously enjoyed by only a privileged few. "You've created something remarkable here," my father acknowledged as we surveyed the Manhattan skyline from the rooftop terrace. His comment reflected genuine admiration rather than grudging acknowledgement, a distinction I had become adept at recognizing. The true healing in my own journey came not from family validation, however welcome, but from the inner reconciliation of my past and present selves. The young woman who had felt perpetually judged and found wanting at family gatherings had used that very judgment as motivation to build something authentic and meaningful. The pain of dismissal had pushed me to prove something initially to others, but ultimately to myself, transforming external criticism into internal clarity about my values and vision. I found freedom in the revelation that being underestimated had been my greatest advantage, allowing me to develop without interference or expectation. The most meaningful moment in my personal evolution came 6 months after the Harrington revelation, when I established a mentorship program for young women interested in urban development. During the program's launch event, I met Zoe Taylor, a brilliant 23-year-old from a background similar to my own, navigating family pressure to follow conventional paths while harboring a passion for community-centered development. "Everyone keeps telling me I'm being unrealistic," she confided during our first mentoring session, "that I should take the corporate job and forget about adaptive reuse projects in transitional neighborhoods." Her frustration and determination mirrored my own journey so perfectly that I found myself sharing lessons it had taken me years to learn. Building something authentic requires courage to follow your vision even when those closest to you don't understand it, I told her. True wealth isn't about accumulation, but about alignment between your work and your deepest values. Tutoring. Zoe and other young developers helped me articulate principles that had guided me intuitively, creating a framework that could be shared and expanded beyond my individual projects. The family's wealth had always been measured in buildings owned, accounts managed, and status maintained. Through my independent journey, I had discovered a fundamentally different definition of success: the integration of financial sustainability with community benefit, personal fulfillment with professional achievement, and independence with meaningful connection. As my portfolio expanded and my family relationships cautiously healed, I recognized the profound truth that had emerged from years of being dismissed and underestimated. The poorest people aren't those with empty bank accounts, but those with lives rich only in money, never discovering the wealth of purpose and integrity that transcends financial measurement. Have you ever been underestimated by family or friends only to prove them wrong later? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest gift, giving us space to build something authentic without interference. If my story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more stories about finding strength in unexpected places. And remember, true wealth isn't measured by what you own, but by owning who you truly are. Thank you for listening, and I hope you carry this thought with you. Success without values is merely accumulation, not achievement.